once, me say, me who say, it's now money word you. No, what then you may add more money job. Now ya what I know, omunko school.
Mute for us. Hello. Kindly check. Yeah, thank you. Good evening once again.
Good evening.
We thank God for giving us the opportunity to study this evening. We are so privileged to have in our midst Dr. Last week we had mental health matters, and we had some challenges, so we couldn't wrap up. Today we are privileged to have him again. And as a reminder, Dr. Seth Mousey is a clinical psychologist. He's a lecturer at the University of Ghana Medical School and also the National Secretary for Ghana Psychological. And he's with our sister church, SDA Church. So to have him here. And since we couldn't wrap up, I'm sure today he's going to give us an overview of that. Wrap up for us, give us more insight into what we were studying. In fact, we all want our health and also share the struggles and grow together as a family. I'm sure Doctor has a lot to add today, and we all have questions for the interaction afterwards. So our brother Nathan Anobin will as the opening prayer. Afterwards, Dr. Seth Mousey Asafo will take over. Thank you.
Okay, please. Hello.
Hello, Nathan. Nathan,
Hello?
can you hear me? Otemenka.
Yeah, please, I can hear you. Yeah.
Okay, kindly give us the opening prayer.
All right. Okay, please, let's pray. Sunday, of course, that was chapter 4. Pepper son need to yes, nothing counting down. We are once again committing ourselves into your hands, oh Lord. We commit this meeting into your hands. Papa, Sunday, of course, we are two nipa already meeting incarnation, Papa. And say one casa, and we do say, only a becassa. Sure say, best Sunday, our team. As a meeting is successful, the INAS name out there. When I share our demon, amen.
Amen. God bless you, Nathan. Pacho say, only comment be a kindly mute for us. Say, Mr. Questioner now for now, since Dr. Asafo Penebe Kasano, kindly mute for us. Make say both English and Twi kakra na ebi mo nso enya emu enti ase nti say hard join there. We are going to miss the English and Twi today. So Dr. Asafo, kindly take over. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and a good evening to us once again.
Good evening.
I'm grateful that we've been able to have this opportunity again so that we could wrap up. And I would like to just give a summary of what we discussed last week, and then we can jump into the question and answers. So essentially, I explained that when we talk about mental health, classically, many people look at mental health only from the perspective of someone being mad or crazy. Technically, we call that being psychotic. Now, I try to explain that mental health encompasses much more than just a behavioral issue or acting out of place in an abnormal way, and that mental health also affected our mood. In fact, there is a whole segment of mental health related issues that are related to mood. And when we talk about mood, we're talking about feelings. So, for example, fear, excessive fear. We're talking about being excessively shy. We're talking about people being angry all the time, or people feeling the need to be dependent on other people. Now, mental health also looks at our ability to handle the daily stresses that we all experience. And I explained that we can never do away with the stresses of life, but we can definitely manage it. And for us in the field of mental health, we always mention to people that your ability to control the stresses in your life plays a significant role in the overall health of your mind. Now, I also talked about the fact that mental health also encompasses the lifestyle choices we make. And I had given an example of what happens to some of us when we take on certain uh, quests. For example, things like not sleeping or not resting enough and being workaholics. We look at how people cope, the use of drugs and alcohol. And these are all essentially lifestyle choices that have an impact on our mental health. Now, I try to explain that it's always good for us to look at mental health like a continuum. And when I talk about a continuum, if you think about a ladder, you can climb up the ladder and you can climb down the ladder. Now, if you think about your mental health like that, you'll notice that there are many things that you can do to enhance your mental health, and also things that occur in our lives, some which, of course, are conscious or intentional, that also causes our mental health to decline. Now, I try to explain that when you look at the scope of mental health and you compare it to physical health, there are days that you probably wake up in the morning, you're not feeling yourself, but you're not sick. And that happens also to mental health. Now, most of the time, people confuse mental health and mental illness. Now, mental health is something that everybody has, but mental illness not everybody has mental illness, but everybody has mental health. And mental health is something that we need to protect or enhance. Now, in terms of causes, the question about what causes mental health related issues has always been a slippery slope for many of us. In fact, now, in many regards, what seems to happen is that mental health conditions are a combination of factors. Now, for instance, we have people who have a predisposition because it runs through their blood or is genetic. So they inherit the predisposition or the tendency to develop that kind of disorder. And I must stress that if you keep your stresses in check and you manage the stresses in your life adequately, you might be a career, but you might never experience a full-blown mental health related challenge. Then we also have people who've gone through significant adverse events. And for this, I'm talking about issues such as trauma, abuse, etc. Now, these life experiences can push our survival system to a place where the amount of stress that we can contain is overwhelming, and that puts our systems out of balance. Then we also look at structural defects within the brain. So, for example, a hit to the brain, or maybe some a part of the brain going dead because of maybe an infarct or a lesion can also cause people to have develop a mental health challenge. Now, there are many different signs and symptoms of mental health related challenges, and I like to highlight a few of them. Now, earlier I mentioned that our mental health relates to our thinking, our feeling, and our actions, and these symptoms also seem to follow in the same. Now, most importantly, I always like to talk about the physical aspects of emotional and mental health. And of course, for many people of faith, when they are struggling or suffering any kind of physical health challenge that does not seem to have any biological basis, and by that I mean you go to the hospital, they run every single test, and they say there's nothing wrong with you, but you are feeling it. You feel weakness all over, you feel pains, and your doctor is saying, "Oh, there's nothing wrong." And then most of the time we explain it as well, then it's spiritual or somebody is zapping me. I'm not in any way saying that the spiritual does not exist, but I also want us to get in our mind that sometimes, I also want us to get into our mind that sometimes we can develop physical symptoms that are as a result of emotional challenges that we have. So some of the classic symptoms of mental health decline has to do with issues that are related to our appetite. So sometimes when people have mental health related issues, what happens is they have a decrease in appetite or an increase in appetite. For many people, the increase in appetite is because when people eat, the brain releases a chemical called dopamine that makes us feel good. So, as part of the way of getting away from those negative feelings of discomfort, people tend to eat so much, not because they are hungry. Now, you can look at it as synonymous to what happens when somebody is drowning their sorrows in bottles of alcohol, which gives them a temporal respite, but the problem keeps coming over and over again. Now, you may have people who develop what you call excessive worries. So they worry about so much. And I always explain that many of the worries that we have are futuristic. Our worries are based in the future. Now, if you ask yourself what you are worried about now, it's usually going to be about the next minute, the next hour, the next day, the next week. So, in essence, when we think about the future, that worry comes in. Now, the Bible admonishes us in a very significant way when Now, the Bible admonishes us in a significant way when it says that worry not about tomorrow because the worries of today are enough in themselves. The Bible also talks about that emotion of fear. And it surprisingly appears in the do not be afraid 365 times, which is just like saying every single day, the word of the day or the expression of the day is do not be afraid. And so excessive worries can be a symptom. Now, for some people, they might start to disconnect or withdraw from other people. So, and for many of us, when we notice people are withdrawing, what we do is we attempt to, go to them and say, "Oh, I see something's happening. What's happening?" But once we do it once or twice and they are not responsive, we interpret it as they're being obnoxious or too long. So we let them go. And once we do that, there's a confirmatory bias in their mind that actually says, nobody cares about me. I'm a burden to many people. And so they start to withdraw. Now, self care becomes a problem. So you may notice that somebody who used to dress really well, who had their nails kempt, Eric, can you please mute your microphone? Will suddenly start not taking care of themselves. And you may notice that something is happening. Now, in some cases, you might also notice a lot of what we weight gain or weight loss. It's very classic that many people lose weight when they're going through a mental health decline. Now, in other instances, you may also notice that people start to lose the ability to sleep. And it typically happens like this: they are either unable to go to bed or they go to bed and they wake up several times before the morning because their mind is always buzzing with something that seems to be bothering them. Now, in extreme cases, you have people who experience what we call delusions, and delusions are beliefs that people have that does not is not backed by any kind of evidence. And I remember talking about a man who had a certain delusion of jealousy. Now he'd go to a restaurant with his wife, and the moment the waiter said something like, "Hello, good evening, you're welcome," he'd get very upset and start accusing the wife of having a relationship with this person. That's what a delusion is. Now, in many regards, the most common delusion we tend to see is what we call delusions of paranoia, where people have beliefs that other people are planning or plotting evil against them. And we find that very common in many of the corporate environments in which we work. Now, Hallucinations are another feature of mental health decline, where people start to perceive things that do not exist. And this usually occurs within our senses. So they might see things that people cannot see, hear voices that people cannot hear, smell things that other people cannot hear, or even have tactile things as what we call a tactile hallucination, where they feel things crawling around their body even though it doesn't exist. And those are usually the extreme forms of it. Now, sometimes people also start to have what you call suicidal ideations. And in these ideations, they actually, no, suicidal ideations typically stem from the beliefs or the feelings of helplessness, hopelessness, and worthlessness. So they don't have any hope of anything. They don't consider themselves worthy. So then they probably say, well, maybe I should just take my life after all. I don't matter in any kind of way. And so suicidal ideation is also a common feature of mental health related challenges. Now, now, in the long term, what happens is when you look at the way mental health related issues are, they start small, they get worse, and once they get worse, they become more sophisticated to treat. In as much as we don't know all the full causes of mental health conditions, we have things that we call risk factors. And so, a risk factor is something that might predispose someone to struggle or to have a mental health related issue. Can be one, experiencing some form of abuse or ongoing trauma. And this can be in romantic relationships, it can be in career relationships, it can even be between a parent and a child. Now, we also know that people who experience significant stress, for example, like the loss of a loved one, can easily be pushed there. People who are isolated or do not have other people around them can also be pushed. And then people who sometimes are also exposed to certain viruses or even, as it were, chemicals can also have that. Now, we know that the use of addictive substances, especially the illicit drugs like marijuana, which is cannabis, cocaine, the tramadol, which is an opiate, are also predisposed to have these kind of challenges. Now, one of the other also risk factors is if there's somebody in your family that has a mental health related challenge, there's a likelihood that it might run through the blood. So, if we are to look at mental health in totality, there are block chunks of what it is, the signs and symptoms, the risk factors, and what causes it. Now, in a similar light, I try to touch on the things that we can do to enhance our mental health. And I explained that one of the quickest or the easiest ones, of course, those that are free, has to do with social connections. And that's why we find in many of our researches that people who belong to a group, especially a religious group, seem to have some immunity to developing mental health crisis. So we know that social support and social connection is a very important thing when it comes to mental health. Now, human beings are hardwired to connect. And so that's why most of the time when you see people, you start to feel a sense of an emotion, and the emotion can be negative. But for the most part in church, you expect that you have positive emotions just by connecting with people, shaking and hugging people. Now, in the doing of those things, the body releases what you call the bonding hormone. And that bonding hormone also affects our mood and our immune system, which is the body's soldiers. Now, I talked also about sleep, and I tried to explain that when it comes to sleep, we must attempt to get 7 to 9 hours of sleep every day. Now, I went further to explain that when you go to bed, you go through a complex cycle which takes approximately 90 minutes to complete each cycle. Now, the optimum level seems to be about 5, which is about 7.5 hours of sleep. In essence, we're always encouraging people. Please mute your microphone, Cheba, for thank you. So we always encourage that when it comes to sleep, you'll attempt to get 7 to 9 hours of sleep. Now, there's a concept of sleep we call sleep quality, and there's what you call sleep quantity. Now, sleep quality only occurs when you complete each single cycle of sleep. And if you look at the way the sleep cycle is orchestrated, it takes approximately 90 minutes. there's a part of sleep which is dream sleep. Now, in dream sleep, we become paralyzed on our body, and that's also God's way of making sure that we do not act out our dreams, or just imagine or envision what would happen if, I'm dreaming and I find somebody who is owing me money, and then I, hold their shirt, yet my wife is sleeping by me. Before we wake up, I might have, caused chaos at home. So usually when we're dreaming, the body becomes paralyzed. Now, most of the time when people deprive themselves of sleep significantly, especially after 72 hours, they start hallucinating. So they see things that are not there, or they hear voices that do not exist. And that happens because the brain needs dreams in order to function. So if you're not sleeping, your brain will say, oh, don't worry, you go ahead and walk about. But I will dream regardless. And that's the brain's way of trying to mimic that kind of sleep. Now, I tell a lot of people that when it comes to sleep, we must bear in mind that sleep as a state is not something that we do. So sleep takes us. So anytime you go to bed and you are trying to sleep, the resultant effect is that you usually are not able to sleep. If we slept, there's no way somebody would be driving and fall asleep, or be listening to the word of God, or sit in a lecture and then fall asleep. So sleep is a state that comes to take us. Now, if you struggle with sleep, there are a number of things that you can do to enhance your sleep further. First one has to do with temperature. So the lower the temperature, the better you sleep. Second thing has to do with darkness. When you sleep in total darkness, the body releases our sleep hormone, which is called melatonin, and it's produced by darkness when you go into darkness. So if you want to sleep and sleep better, you must sleep in absolute darkness. Now, we also encourage people to be active during the day. Now, the brain explains daytime in terms of light and activity, and nighttime in terms of inactivity and darkness. So, anytime you are not meeting this criteria, it's difficult for you to actually go to bed. Now, how many of us have noticed that sometimes right before you go to bed, you start remembering all the things that you should have done or things you should do, and you start to worry about them? Now, that's because the human brain looks at our sleep as one of our weakest periods. And it fears that when we sleep, we'll forget or we're not doing anything productive. So, right before you go to bed, it attempts to rehearse all the things you need to do because it doesn't want you to forget. Now, a simple trick to mitigate this effect is keep a notepad by your bed. Each time you have a thought about something you should have done, or something you didn't do, or something you need to do, which is the future, just write it down. Once your brain recognizes that it has a concrete reference point, it will say, oh, I won't forget, and then it will allow you to, seep into sleep. Now, the issue of food before bed is also important. Now, if you eat too close to sleep time, your body is still working, it's playing host because it's still digesting food. So you are not able to get into deep sleep where the magic occurs. So these are just a few tips that can enhance our sleep. Now, the third one has to do with exercise or staying physically active, and especially any exercise that allows us to breathe in more, which is aerobic exercise, allows for oxygen-rich blood to go to the brain and enrich or nourish it. Now, if you look at the human neurochemistry, the chemical that we use for motivation, called dopamine, is the same chemical that we use in movement. In essence, each time people complete bouts of physical activity, the brain motivates us by releasing this dopamine. And it says you've been able to achieve something. And so if you look at the prescription, they say exercise at least 30 days every single day before you start your day. And it keeps you motivated, whether you're in school or you are in a corporate world or you are practicing your own career or your own business person. And it's a fact just because of that release of that chemical. Now, we also talk about the fact that you should avoid what we call maladaptive coping resources. And maladaptive coping resources are ways in which we try to make ourselves feel a sense of balance. Now, for Adventists, thankfully, our rules to keep are very helpful. And so we don't consume alcohol or drugs. These things only give you a temporal respite to your challenge, but it comes back. However, most of us are engaged in technology surfing, or we're on Instagram or Facebook or TikTok or something, and it steals our time. But more importantly, it also causes our brains to get addicted. Now, once the addiction comes, we get bored by so many things, and that can become very stressful to us. Now, we also know that one of the best ways to enhance our mental health is to do things in the service of others. Now, the human brain has what we call mirror neurons. And so, mirror neurons essentially help us to enjoy positive emotions through others. So, for instance, when you do something good for someone and then, they're happy, it allows you to also be happy. And so, when you're doing things for people, you can enjoy from what they do. Now, we also encourage people to practice gratitude. Gratitude answers the question, in spite of all the challenges I'm going through, what do I have that I can be grateful for? What do I have that I can be proud for? And within our religious sect, we talk about count your blessings. Now, each time you're going through a hard time, and you say, in spite of this hard time, what do I have that I can be happy about? What do I have that I can be grateful for? Your brain tends to walk away from the challenges or the thoughts you're having of the negativity or the aura of danger, and brings you back to the present where you have control. Now, last week, I explained that we are what we think, and most of the time, our stresses and our worries are based on our thinking patterns and not things that will actually happen. Now, most of us have had experiences where we thought something was going so wrong. We thought, this is the end for me. I can't do anything about it. And the situation passed, and we wondered, so is that all? And I made this analogy of what happens when we watch movies. I explained that sometimes you're watching a movie and you're crying even though you know it's a movie. That's how powerful the human mind is. That whatever you think can become so real that you experience it in real time. In essence, it's always good to sanitize our thoughts and look at perspectives. Now, perspectives help to curb the emotional responses we have. I gave this example that I hated people, overtaking me or cutting me off when I was driving, because in my mind they thought they were better than me, or they were in a hurry, or maybe their car was faster. But one day when my stomach disturbed me and I realized, no, they could probably have been doing that because they were also suffering like I was. That perspective changed so much, and now I don't get into a road rage. So these are just a few pointers about our mental health. This is a recap. I think it's been a very long recap, and I would like for us to go into the question and answer so that I can elaborate more on some of the things that we may want to find more about mental health. So thank you all very much, and I wait to answer your questions.
Thank you so much, Asafo. But we are grateful for our mental health and our mental health. We are grateful. I'm sure we all have questions and contributions. Doc, are you comfortable with the tree?
Woman it.
Okay. If you have any contribution, any question. In fact, last week there were some other contributions and questions, but so since he's around, kindly and feel free, you can raise your hand and I'll call you so that you bring your questions or contribution. So the floor is open. We have about 30 minutes to do this. Will be a question or contribution. Kindly let us know. So I have a contribution. I think Doug has really made some points. Also, you're taking it serious. Something that we could use, we could adapt to overcome mental health challenges. 7 others. In fact, AMO and our ARM slogan or in our quest 7 others, wakyerɛ mu sɛ no nkwampo build yɛn ma yɛntumi overcome any form of worrying ɛboa yɛn and afei nso yɛ practice gratitude, we being grateful, counting our blessings ɛno ɛboa yɛn yie na ɛno abuild yɛn stronger sɛ ɛbɛyɛ a yɛnya challenges with our health mentally. So if there is any question or contribution, kindly let us know. Thank you. So we are raising the SDA. Okay, Jerry. Yeah.
Okay. Doc, thank you so much for the time and the notes you have given us for this evening. I have a quick question. If I don't know whether it's been tackled, but let me ask anyway.
Okay.
Okay, so as part of trying to manage your mental health, where gratitude is a factor or helping others, okay, let me, not the gratitude part, helping others is a factor where it could help you manage. Will the recipient's action also affect you in a way? Let's say I help, and probably I'm not getting, in my mind's eye, I'm not probably getting responses that shows that my works, I mean, the Ameya is being appreciated. But this in a way affects me either by still doing it or even affecting my way of thinking or mental something.
Absolutely. So you see, Jerry, what you're asking about is in the realms of expectation. Now, it turns out that when you have so much expectations, you tend to struggle also. And that's because we can never in any way influence how people react. We can only, what we do have control over is the way we respond. Okay. Now, I tell people that when you're doing something, don't do it with the mindset that you should get something in return. Because once you do that and it doesn't happen, the negative impact that you experience also impacts your mental health. However, if you volunteer to do something for some people, you do it because you feel the need of helping. That context in itself allows for the bonding hormone, which is oxytocin. And mind you, oxytocin is the same chemical that's released into our blood when people fall in love. And so you notice that in the beginning of every relationship, everything is sweet. You know, it's such a pleasant experience. You notice no flaws about your partner. And then suddenly, when oxytocin gets out of the blood, like people synonymously would say, when you're chewing gum, it starts with the sugar and at some point it gets stuck with the rubber. So that's what oxytocin does. It gets into your blood and makes you feel that euphoria. Now, it turns out that when we sleep, that also happens to us. So that's why we wake up. Usually, you should wake up feeling refreshed. If you wake up in the morning and you're struggling to stay awake, it means you didn't get the best of sleep. So, yes, Jerry, what you're saying is true. If you have an expectation and it's not being met, what happens is your thoughts become they're ungrateful, they don't appreciate what, and that makes you go into an emotional negative state. I mean, negative emotional state. On the other hand, if you're doing it because you just want to do it, you don't care what their reaction is, you actually will feel the joy. Now, when you do things with little expectations and you get positive feedback, your joy is usually magnified. So that's how I would answer the question that you asked me. Thank you.
Thank you, too.
Thank you very much, Doc. Is there any hand up? Please, if you have a question or contribution, kindly raise your hand. If you are not finding that button, you can unmute and ask your questions. Okay. Elder Takra, kindly go ahead.
Good evening. So my question is this: let's say, growing up, I had a lifelong dream that by the age of 35, I should have gotten married and given birth to all my children. Let's say as a woman, okay. And then I realized that I'm now 34 or 35. I'm not even married. Let's talk about having children. And I've also maybe read scientifically that by 35, I cannot even give birth. And so this one has a toll on me. It's heartbreaking. And I feel like even if I should get married in the next year, I may never have a child till I die. This thing keeps worrying me. And it keeps breaking my heart, And life seems to be useless now. Even if I should get married after a particular age, I felt like I should have been having all my kids. How should I handle such a situation?
Thank you. I think I even touched on this and I explained what happens with the way we think. Now, you see, anytime you leave the present for the future, unfortunately, you are only going to struggle. So, in the present, you have control. In the future, you have no control. Yes, I expected to be married at 34. I can't do anything about it. But the moment I start to jump into the future and say, so it means I'll struggle with children, it means I'm adding so much more onto the stresses that I feel. Now, the other side is we're already stressed because we're not achieving a goal that we want. However, if we choose to say, you know what, let me just concentrate on today. Let me deal with today the best way I can. Tomorrow comes, I will deal with it. That's the way we psychologists or mental health professionals will tell you that we cannot control it. The need to be married or the being married is not something that's within the control of a single person. And if you can't control something and you attempt to control it, you only get stressed. So I go back to the Bible and say, worry not about tomorrow. So just focus on today, one day at a time. There's one of those hymns that says, one day at a time. So that's how we would deal with this. Thank you.
Okay. I want to add something to what Doc said. In fact, he quoted Matthew 6. I want to start from 25 to 33. So when we have time, we should really read this. The caption is "Do not worry." In fact, what true. These are realities in life. But Nyankopon asem, so this is words directly from Christ himself. Or see, even the birds, they don't worry, but he feeds them. And things that Christ mentioned, or how can you say we should not even worry about food, what we will wear, what and what? Because he knows that there will be a time this would happen to us. So that's the benefits we Christians we have. We have Christ that we could leave all our burdens to him. Christ is giving you that life. You are aging. He has something better for you. There are so many examples. So being so about 40, 45. Otimi worry enyaneba. So no matter the situations we find ourselves in, we accept that yes, there are these challenges, and at a point we'll be tempted to worry. But let's encourage ourselves with the words of Christ in Matthew 6, verse 25 to 33. And I know that He Himself, who knows what we need, will help us in times of need like that. Thank you.
Thank you, Gifty, and I think Dr. Asaf. But the point I was trying to make us also look at it was that sometimes some things are terminated in itself. Let's say, I never thought I could lose a leg or a hand, and that has happened. Should I live with an expectation that something should happen, that I should get 2 legs at all costs? Or sometimes we have to face it that, well, I think I thought this should happen, and it never happened, and I have to just concentrate on today. Because the idea of like expectation, I think you mentioned that in answering the first question. Sometimes our expectations becomes too much. We still live in expectations, and for all you know, those things are not what God has planned for us, but have other things. I personally feel like that also affects our mental health. If we give ourselves a particular time to get something and that thing never happens to us, it will rather break our hearts if we give time to certain things. Yes, we can be hopeful, but we must also face reality sometimes and know that even in the current situation, God knows why it has happened that way. And it has something you can even find pleasure in than what you think you were expecting. So that is the way I was actually looking at it. And I think both contributions also add value to what I was thinking.
Thank you, sir. So it's just a day at a time.
Yeah.
Deal with today, tomorrow will come, we'll deal with it in that order. Thank you.
Thank you. Please, any question or contribution? We have really had insightful discussion on mental health. Dr. Kanyema Bebre about what we need to do. Say I develop these symptoms. So Bibi if you have something that you would want to share with us, kindly unmute or raise your hand. Na yede ako. Okay, before that, Dr. Asafo, looks like I have quite a number. My question is, you made mention sometimes it could be hereditary, but symptoms now cause mental health issues. I'm wondering how that could be hereditary. So if you could put more emphasis on a light on that. Thank you.
I don't think I understand your question. Hello?
Okay, so you said that
Yes.
sometimes if someone has this issue, mental health issue in your family, it's likely that you may also develop this. Maybe I didn't get it right.
Okay.
But did you make mention of such things?
I
So
said
I'm
it's a
asking
risk factor.
how this could, if maybe my grandparents, it's a risk factor. Yes, but how? How is that a risk factor?
Okay,
If
so let me
maybe my
explain it this
grandmother
way.
had this issue, how does it put?
Okay. Think about it like the soil, okay? When the soil is fertile and you plant a seed, it will grow. Now, think about this fertile soil as the fact that you carry a specific gene or structure within your body that opens you up to that kind of challenge. Now, but I mentioned that most of the time there's a trigger, and this trigger is usually a stressor. Now, last week, I think I even went on to say that we all know somebody who was doing very well, and then something happened to them, and after that they lost it. Like they lost a loved one, they went through a robbery, they lost their job, and suddenly they became a drunk, or that we say they lost their money. Now you can carry it. So, for example, maybe physically, if I talk about the gene for being a sickle cell person, that is the body is fertile for that disorder. Now, in mental health, on the other hand, even when you are a carrier, it doesn't necessarily mean that you will develop it. But the tendency for you to develop it in comparison to people who are not carriers is usually high. Now, let me be very specific. In a specific disorder like schizophrenia, if you have a first degree relative who has it, the tendency that someone in the family line will also develop it is about 50%. Now, if you take depression and bipolar disorders, that also is about 50%, the chance that the person will develop it. Interestingly, when we do twin studies, so when we use like identical twins, and one of them develops a mental health condition, the other one automatically also is a carrier. And if they all go through the same amount of stress, they are likely to develop that disorder. So the key element here is managing or mitigating your stresses, that even if you have a biological or genetic predisposition, it will not manifest if you keep your stresses in check. I hope that is helpful.
Yes, please. Thank you. Okay, there's a hand up. Yes.
Okay, yeah. So I also want to ask
Takra.
yeah. I want to ask that is there a difference between mental health and somebody who is mad? Or I don't know whether in mental we don't say someone is mad, because there are people, those we see on the street. Those we see go naked on the streets and eating from the gutters and all that. Do we call them or do we identify them to be having mental health issues, or we say they are mad? I want to know the line between madness and mental health.
Okay. So, I explained earlier, I said everybody has mental health, but everybody does not have mental illness. What you call mad is what we call psychotic, and that is an illness. But when you look at mental health, I made this analogy that take physical health. There are days that you wake up, you don't feel your full strength, but you are not sick. And it's the same thing for mental health. That's to say, it's a state of well being that usually has to do with your thoughts and your emotions. Now, when those have been compromised, that's when somebody develops mental illness. So when you see somebody who is mad, they have mental illness, and so their mental health has declined. But you see, the stigma of mental health is because people equate mental health to mental illness. But mental health is not mental illness. Mental health is a state, it's a continuum, one that can be enhanced and one that can, specific actions can make decline. But mental health is when we say you are now not well, and you can say that that's madness. In that realm, we now have to intervene or we have to treat using medication or psychotherapy or sometimes brain stimulation techniques. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do we have any hand up? Any question or contribution? Okay. Then I guess we are all okay with the presentation and the explanations that has gone on. Okay. So please, you also made mention of things that could lead to this mental health condition. We not having enough sleep, illicit drugs and all that. But Max, and which one can actually lead to the mental health illness, or in Ghana, which one normally, because you've been a psychologist, I'm sure you've encountered so many patients, which one normally could speed up our situation leading us to mental illness?
I mean, I wish I could tell you that this specific one is more prominent, but what I want you to understand is that we all have very different experiences in what we call neurocircuitries. So the things that may trigger one person to illness may not do same for the other person. The reality is that a combination of these factors will usually play a role to push someone into a certain state. I can't give you the statistics for which is more prominent or which is more potent, because half the time it's even difficult for other professionals to know what the basis of the illness is. Thankfully, the treatment is almost the same across board, so that's quite easy, except you have what we call environmental circumstances or specific stresses that we can deal with. So, for instance, if someone is going through a long-term abuse, by creating safety, we mitigate the stress for them. If somebody is dealing with, say, significant stress at work, by helping them to manage that, by helping them with emotional intelligence training, conflict resolution skills, we interfere with the way the stress would ordinarily impact them. So it's a little difficult to say this is more potent than the others, although people may want me to say, oh, yes, when you take drugs, you are more predisposed. But yes, we do have people also who use drugs who never suffer it. So it's just a myriad. So we don't ever have a single cause for any mental health related issue. It's usually a combination of factors. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I think last week. Somebody raise a hand?
Yeah, I'm muted. Please hold on. I don't know whether she has a comment.
Okay.
Okay. Pastor, please go ahead.
Right. So I think last week when he was disconnected, somebody was raising an important point that even as we talk about mental health, we should also be very careful some questions or statements we make to people which also affect their mental health. And I don't know maybe whether a facilitator have some of these things like to share with us. Sometimes somebody meets someone and asking, hey, so how is your wife? But you have no idea whether the person has a wife or not. And so how many children do you have? But probably the person has no children. Hey, so where are you now? Maybe you finished school with somebody 10 years ago, and the person is expecting that by now you should be in a particular company, meet you. So why are you working now? And probably you've not been employed yet. Some of these questions tend to have a toll on the minds of people, which also causes mental health. I don't know whether you have any counsel surrounding how we confront people and the things we have to talk about.
Well, yeah. I see the point you're making. As a mental health professional, our focus is usually on the way we respond, which is your individual level factors. You cannot control how somebody should interact with you. You cannot control what they will say or what they won't say, but you can control the way you react to them. So if, for example, someone asks you, hey, so when are you going to have a child? In as much as it is a question that evokes a sense of stress, they have no idea what you're going through. And if you let their comments become a basis for you to get stressed, that's the way you are responding. Now, in my clinic, for example, I'll teach you to respond differently to such a statement. I'll teach you to respond differently to maybe not having a job and people expecting that you have a job, because you can control the way you react to that comment, but you can't control what the other person should say. And if you expect other people to change to you, unfortunately, you're going to get even more stressed. So that's the way I can explain this for you. Thank you.
Okay, and permit me to add something to what Doc said. With we responding now, we are 22 here. Fine, as we said, we should be careful how we take such comments from people. By your best stress again, so we should be careful how we even what we say to others. Obi awo wayɛ kɛseɛ dodo osuate dodo. We as Adventist youth too can make a change. We are 22. If now we are also careful about what we say to others, knowing that it can affect them mentally, it will really also help others improve their mental health condition. Thank you. Any other comments or contribution? Okay, so in the absence of comments and contribution, we would say a very big thank you to our brother and friend, Dr. Mausi Asafo, for such an insightful presentation on mental health condition. I'm sure the good Lord is going to help us improve this condition. Next week, God willing, we are going to have another discussion on courtesy for boys and girls. In fact, this is a must-attend program. And I'm sure that we are really going to have an insightful discussion, courtesy for boys and girls. Normally, when we hear this topic, we think of those in the primary school. No, this is going to take a different level altogether. So kindly make time with us. Our sister Amma Joyce, if you're online and can hear me, kindly give us the closing prayer.
Bamjome Mbompai. Yes, you do my for and then I do that was it. I want to try a fat wakwaso a dear my. Yes, so ye dear nimpa. Yes, sir, one more day being here. It's me dear and church so dear my. Yes, so say and fan come here, fedum ye. Boy, na yentumi fa ensem wei ensua ade wom na yentumi ne afoforo enche. Yɛsrɛ yɛkɔ akɔde bɔ yɛn ho ban efi ɔtamfo abɔnsa hyehyɛdeɛ nyinaa mu na ɔma ade pa kye a yɛmfa w'ase da ɛndi da biara da. Yɛda w'ase sɛ woetie yɛn na ɔbɛyɛ ama wɔ Nyame Agya, Nyame Ɔba, Nyame Honhom Kronkron din mu nti. Amen.
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 Mister, may the Lord watch between us as we depart one from another. Amen.